Welcome to Margin for Mission, the CRI Cape and Cross podcast, where two friends, Ken and Chris, bring you real talk about creating space for what matters most. Because when your organization has financial and operational margin, you can focus on your mission with confidence.
We're professionals who've spent years helping churches, higher education institutions, and other mission-focused nonprofit organizations manage their accounting, tax, compliance, and other challenges. We understand the complexities you face, and we're here to make it simpler.
In each episode, we'll dive into practical insights on leadership, operations, and the everyday challenges of running a nonprofit without the jargon.
And we'll talk about life, too. Family, faith, quite a bit of football, and finding balance in a world that rarely slows down.
So whether you're managing budgets, leading teams, or just trying to keep your mission moving forward, you're in the right place.
This is Margin for Mission. Let's get started. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Margin for Mission. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Purnell, and as always, guiding the discussion and keeping us on the rails and bringing the fun is Ken Tan. Ken Tan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I feel a little bit inadequate because my bookshelves seem pretty bare compared to y'all's, but let me just preface that all of my books are in audiobook or Kindle tablet format. So that's just want to make sure I'm prefacing some type of equalizer, but it is so good to be here with you all.
Likewise, man. Likewise. You know, I'm looking at our guest bookshelves. Man, he's just killing it. Mine are. I'm sure that I've read at least 10% of the book on these shelves. It's getting worse and worse every day. So, Ken, you know, I agree with you, man. Like ebooks, kind of the way to go because just the amount of like finite space they have available is a premium. Although we could get into the debate / just fervent dialogue about audiobooks and whether audiobooks are really reading. Are they really reading? I don't know. Jury's still out in my mind. But maybe our guest can help sort things out for us. So our esteemed guest today on the podcast is Pastor Benjamin Burdick, the son of my right hand, strong biblical name. And Ben is not just a good friend of mine, but he's also my pastor at World Gospel Church in Terre Haute, Indiana. I've been going to World Gospel now for a little over 5 years, and it's just been a joy and a privilege to serve alongside of him and get to know him and his leadership. And he's a exceedingly godly man. I appreciate so many things about him. So Ben, welcome to the podcast, man.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Chris and Ken. This is a real treat for me, and just getting to talk to you a little bit, Chris, and hear a little bit about what you do in helping churches and nonprofits, and that whole world is a pretty cool thing too. So a lot of admiration your direction too for the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So the way we start off these kind of podcasts where we have guests on is we try to get to know a little bit more about them, about their story, how they got to where they are today in their illustrious positions. So for you, from your perch, we'd love just to hear a little bit more about your testimony, how you came to know the Lord, and then as part of that, vocation. How did you decide that being a preacher man was the way to go for Pastor Ben Burdick? So tell us about yourself.
There you go. Well, thanks. Yeah. Back to the book question though, audiobooks do not count for reading. So you can't say I read somewhere when you listen to an audiobook. You can't say that.
Well, I listed that essentially eliminates half of what I have. Yep, because I have a bunch that I bought on my audiobooks, but I have on my must read or must listen, I guess.
Must listen. Yeah, there you go. That's just one man's opinion. Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for asking about my past. Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My parents are sort of first generation believers, came out of cultural Christianity, but weren't walking with the Lord. And so I grew up in a home that was figuring out what it meant to be Christian and to follow Jesus. But we faithfully attended church. And from the time I was a little boy, I had real high admiration for pastors. So some kids have sports figures that they idolize and wish they could grow up to be. And for some reason, those people in my life were pastors. So I just really admired them. I grew up, saturated in the gospel all the time, but I had a distinct moment when sin for me became really clear. And I needed to trust Jesus as my savior to be forgiven and have life and be rescued from the punishment of sin in hell. And so I made that profession of faith and experienced what I believe was genuine salvation at about 8 years old. And so from the time I was a little boy, I wanted to be a pastor. So my calling was really kind of baked into the cake for me. I never really struggled with that. But when you get into your teen years, you've got to make educational decisions and vocational decisions. That all starts getting really real fast. And so I spent a couple days really trying to seek the Lord's face and some fasting and prayer and isolation, and got really confirmed to me that that was the direction that I was supposed to go. I haven't really looked back on that since, even during the hard times of pastoring, and there's real clear sense from God that I'm supposed to be in vocational ministry. And so he's been gracious enough to confirm that in a number of different ways in my life. Yeah. So during seminary, just how he funded my seminary. And so I kind of gathered from just that subjective sense from the Lord and from other people that I was headed the right direction. So here I am serving to the best of my ability. I look at myself and I say, man, why me? Or, why am I in this role? And sometimes I wonder, but I'm grateful that God's placed the call on my life. So
Now, a little bit about Pastor Benjamin. I was just curious, are you originally from the state of Indiana, or did the Lord call you from an original journey elsewhere and it ultimately brought you to the church now?
yeah, so I grew up a military brat and lived all over the country and some in Europe. And so I came here to Indiana from Arizona. And it was kind of, Indiana wasn't really on my radar of places to go. I had Colorado mountains in mind or something like that. But God called me to the plains and the flatness of Indiana and the wonderful people here. So I just connected paths with people who had a common purpose and ministry here in Terre Haute. And boy, once we connected, it was a beautiful thing. And I'm really grateful that the Lord moved us here. So yeah, long way from what was home in Arizona.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe you didn't get the Colorado Rockies, but you did get the high ground, which is obviously what Terre Haute means in the French. You got the mountains of Indiana. That's where that phrase comes from. Some French explorer was traveling. This is a true story, and he noted that he saw the mountains of Indiana, and I don't know if he was lost in some kind of transcendent state that I do not know of, but I have not seen these mountains of Indiana.
Neither have I. Been looking.
So you mentioned that you had some confirmation moments in your calling, both internally, just that strong sense, the strong leading of the Holy Spirit, but also externally. Can you give us some more anecdotes, some more stories of the moments that you can point to where you really felt, yeah, like I'm on the right path. This is where God has called me in my ministry.
Yeah. So some of it's just ministry performance in doing the thing, and people were blessed by the thing. I remember in youth group, you have youth Sundays at some churches and the youth do everything. Well, in our church, the youth preach the sermon too. Like, boy, those people, what were they thinking? And I was a youth that was tapped to do that, and really, really enjoyed it and got great response there. And then it just sort of continued to happen like that in speaking and in caring for people. People sort of naturally were drawn to me as a leader and followed the directions that I was going. And so those things sort of checked together with the call. I mentioned about the funding. That was a kind of a cool story. I was working full-time and going to seminary full-time. And there's just a lot of, I was using every spare moment to study and I was struggling, Lord, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't want to be in seminary for the rest of my life. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And what do I do? And so my wife and I were praying about it for a number of months. And one day I was coming out of my seminary class with a classmate, and she asked how I was doing. I was kind of, well, to be honest with you, things are pretty tough. I'm exhausted, but trying to figure out what's next. And she said, would it help if I were to pay for the rest of your seminary and for you to go part-time
wow.
work? And I said, well, what do you mean? I didn't have a category for that. And and so when I asked her that, she said, well, like, you register and I pay. Like, that's not very difficult to figure out. You go ask your wife if this is something you want to do. But the stipulations are you have to work normal hours Or like you can't be working crazy shifts and you have to cut down to at least half. And so, man, it sounds like a great deal. So went back and prayed with it with my wife, and we agreed. And yeah, she paid the rest of my seminary. And that was just a moment where I
Praise
felt
God.
like
Yeah.
both there was the answer to prayer, like, oh, Lord, you heard me, but also this is exactly what you want me to do. This doesn't just happen to people, you know? And so it was a very confirming moment from me after that. Now, that helped sustain me too, because I came out of seminary in 2008 when the economy had just crashed and pastors were being laid off.
Yeah.
And so there was a period of time where I didn't enter into vocational ministry, but served as a lay leader in my church, even though I was ordained at the time. And those are beautiful times too. But it was very confirming. And as I look back on it, helped sustain me in waiting till God led me into a more visible role.
Yeah. Well, I was curious because I know a lot of times, anytime anyone sees a lead pastor or a senior pastor of a church, they tend to, and even I myself am guilty of this. You forget the journey that you get there too, right? Essentially, it's just like, oh yeah, Pastor Benjamin, he's got it made now. He's leading a church now. But then even just leading up to where you were at, these are some of the things that have consideration where you're able to look back and say, God, you were there the whole time. And that's where part of it, I think it helps shape a lot of the things that you've seen. I was curious, did you have specific mentors on top of that that helped kind of shape towards where you are at today during your journey from where you first started seminary to now World Gospel Church?
Yeah, all along the way, God brought really godly, wise practitioners of ministry into my life. I started in ministry at a small Baptist church around Houston area, and the pastor there just really poured into me. That was a beautiful thing. So I was a minister of youth and outreach, not ordained or anything, but just serving part time. And then from there into seminary, God connected me with a theologian who really invested in me personally and exemplified spirit led, sensitive, wise, and mutual theological discussions and ministry, but with the sense of that the church really has something to say and some important guards that it needs to exercise in doctrine
Mm.
and in membership, and that was a beautiful thing to me. And then a couple of the other people, just a couple long-term pastors, one who pastored for 50 years, gentle, godly man who had just has absolutely I don't know how he has this, but all of his memories of ministry are beautiful and glorious, and so it just gave me such a a lot of times there's a tale of woe, pastoring is so hard,
Oh yeah.
but for him it was just a beautiful thing, and how much God showed His faithfulness in every step of the way, and so few people like that have really been a key for me, and then one mentor now who I'd call anytime and bring up a leadership challenge or a people challenge or a ministry challenge. And boy, he's right there with godly wisdom. I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I'm curious as well, Pastor Benjamin, because I know this is where part of his I've been able to see, of course, with someone as awesome as Chris attending World Gospel Church as well. That means that I'd love to hear a little bit more about World Gospel Church. So share me a little bit about the church itself. I know this is where part of it is a lot of folks, especially when it comes to just the whole gamut and the whole spectrum of churches, they tend to see, of course, the ones that are in the front page, and I mean like front page, essentially the ones that are always the highlighted ones, which are those mega churches. But that's not what majority of the churches are. Even my role, for example, there's over 300,000 places of worship in the church in the United States. That means in itself that not every church is a mega church. So I'd love to hear from you, Pastor Benjamin, about World Gospel Church. Some of the things about it that makes it so unique.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for asking. So World Gospel is a church of about, I don't know, maybe average attendance around 350 on a Sunday,
Nice.
give or take. And we're located in a small town of about 50,000 people, but it's a regional town with a lot of traffic from other towns around. And we're right on the edge of town. So just beyond our borders, down the road, are corn and soybean fields that stretch out into the country. So we're an interesting mix surrounded by four universities. We have just a real mixed flavor. I love it. We have just a great mixture of professional and tradesmen, of students, a thriving college group, and people who just have their hands in the soil of the earth and are connected in just that practical way of farming and that kind of life. So some of the things that are unique about our church is because we're close to so many those large educational institutions, we have a lot of professors and students in that college ministry I mentioned. So it brings a little bit of a different flavor to our church than we might have otherwise. And love that fact because you kind of have the full breadth of you could kind of get nerdy
Yeah.
in a sermon or a Sunday school class, and people will appreciate it. And
It's
you
true.
can keep it straight down the line, and people appreciate that too. So.
Well, my guess is, of course, for the size of World Gospel, which even of itself, 300 is actually a pretty solid number. And this is where part of
Mhm.
it is. I think about it with my background as well. So within the Southern Baptist itself, there's over 45,000. I know they probably have larger numbers now, 45,000 churches in that denomination in particular, but a majority of them are actually less, have an average about 100 and below. And that's where
Mhm.
part of it is essentially saying the numbers don't really matter. It's really the mission piece right there. But this is where part
Mhm.
of it is, I know we've had the chance to talk to a pastor of a larger church, but of course, maybe this is a safe assumption is you most likely don't have a kids pastor, a youth pastor, student pastor, campus pastor, all that. So that means that most likely you're having to wear multiple hats or other team members are. I'd love to hear kind of how that works for you in terms of how not only are you serving, but how you're also leading, especially if the dynamic is a little bit different than another church that may be larger.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're solidly in that medium-sized church category. So, small being up to 200, medium being 200 to 400, large being 4 to something 8 maybe, and then, very big and mega beyond that, right? Yeah. And so we're in a unique space where we feel the tug of the small church and the big church because of we're right there in the center. So people will feel the connection of, hey, we're a small enough church that everybody should know everybody and the pastor should be in everybody's lives at an intimate detail, but then also we're big enough to where we should have all the services and all the programs of a mega church or a large size church. And so there's kind of that tug both directions. So what that leads us, kind of just our situation with staff and volunteers and how that plays out. I do wear a few hats, but we have enough resources and availability for a youth pastor and an associate pastor, which we're working on right now. Children's ministry staff, building and maintenance staff, office staff, things like that. So we do have um, a solid group, a solid team that are working together for ministry. But we do end up wearing a lot of different hats and figuring out who we are and where our contours are. That is a little bit of the challenge, I think. And so you have to have some humility to say, hey, we're not the mega church or the big church. So maybe we tone down and focus on these things. But then also, let's really jump in with each other to take care of those interpersonal needs that you can't really expect a staff at a church this size to be able to be connected with 100%.
Right, right. Well, I know that from my personal experience as an elder at World Gospel Church, that we've really wrestled with what's the sort of purview of volunteers and spiritual leadership and the
Hmm.
elders and the deacons and your lay leaders that are just super involved, and what's the purview of staff and what is the purpose of staff and what are staff members there to help the church accomplish, and what are the paid pastoral staff there to help the church accomplish. So I'd love to hear your thoughts kind of on your philosophy of ministry. What are the paid pastoral staff members there to do with the congregation? And how did you kind of get to the point where you are in the way that you think about paid pastors?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of gets back to the idea once you get to a certain size, you end up having two ministry teams that are operating, and senior pastors leading both of those and figuring out this dance is kind of a challenge. Chris, you serve as an elder in our church, and the elder council is so key for the oversight, doctrine of the church, spiritual health of the church, direction of the staff. And yet the elders are not here on the ground at church throughout the day during the work week, doing a lot of the practical tasks of ministry. That's covered by the ministry teams that are here, and so providing leadership and coordination between those two bodies is really key and part of the dance. I think a church our size engages with. As far as paid staff goes and paid pastoral staff, What a blessing it is. You know, kind of being one of those people who really believes in the priesthood of believers.
Hmm.
I very
Hmm.
strongly believe that everyone in the church is gifted for and called to ministry. And without everybody, all hands on deck, we're really missing out on the way the Holy Spirit intends to bring to bear all the blessing that he has for the church in the gifts that he's given. And so that's really, really key. Start there. But then there are tasks that require sort of a level of concentration once you get to a certain size, and a level of maybe training as well, gifting and calling involved in that, that makes sense for the church to say, we recognize the calling of that person and their gifting to the point where we're going to say it's worth the investment for them to put their hand to the plow and serve us as one of us, just in a full-time capacity. So that's a paid staff, and paid pastoral staff is just that, what the experience I had of a calling to serve as a shepherd, and then that same gifting. You realize that there's just a abundant blessing that can be done through any level of investment in pastoral care. But when you do decide a church, is going to meet in one location and have this number of needs concentrated, it makes sense for people to be set aside for that work. And we see that biblical warrant in Paul, in his ministry as well. He is funny. He tells one church, I don't charge you guys anything. There's no payment I expect from you. But in the same breath, he's saying, because somebody else is paying me to do this ministry on their behalf for you. And so we see that it's an awkward spot to be in some ways, but if I can not put myself in the business world in my leadership viewpoint, but put myself squarely in the body of Christ, linking arms with brothers and sisters, then it feels a lot more like a team effort and less like a one man show.
Mm.
Well, and this is where even just some considerations, I think in many ministries and churches, they face that conversation that I know you probably have seen I know I credit Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 80-20 principle, or in just in general, how 80% of the work gets done by 20% of people. And I think that even happens in volunteers and in staff at the church. And so there's a lot of times that those that are very much willing to help they dive in all the way, but they potentially have that burnout. I was curious, Pastor Benjamin, how do you all approach? I know you were talking about just kind of the staff side, but how do you all essentially focus on whether it's identifying a person's spiritual gifts, or what are there some types of things that y'all are doing as a part of new member orientation? And then as a part of that, how are y'all able to help manage that, knowing that they're not paid staff, but part of it is saying you still have to help manage that finite resource, which is time as well as a part of finances. So I was just curious about some of that too as well, Pastor.
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces and all of that. Yeah, really wanting to activate people for their gifts. It is part of our member process. When people come in, we invite them to share what it is that they're gifted at, their interests in serving in ministry. But then we also try to be aware as leaders as we see the gifts manifesting themselves in people's lives. As people have a propensity to teach, or they have a real knack for service or for hospitality, empowering them, calling them into ministry and letting them serve. I haven't found the secret sauce on how to keep people from over volunteering, because people's hearts are just in it, and they want to see the church succeed, and they want to see people blessed and ministry happen. And so the one thing that I have found, and I have to fight this myself as well, but for all of us to say, what kind of rhythms of rest can we build in? So
Mm.
even though we're working hard, how do we rest appropriately so that we're renewed for the ministry? And when you rest, you come face to face with your finiteness, because by stopping, something's not getting done. And you have to have faith in God that He's actually the one doing the work. And Chris, you've been just such a great example to me on this level. Chris oversees our discipleship and Sunday school and ministries in the church, at the elder level. And just one of the things that he's brought into that ministry is sabbatical for our teachers, a time of rest. During the summer, our teachers get a rest, and so some of those rhythms, I think, are what help us step back and say, okay, I'm part of the ministry team, but really the one doing the heavy lifting, the one who's got all the responsibility on his shoulders is the Lord himself. And so I can fit where I can fit and leave the rest to him and work as hard as I can, but trust him in that. So burnout is a real thing. Sometimes, enabling people to say no is a big thing. Saying it's okay for you to look at a church member who asks you to do something and say no. Or there's a great ministry idea that we have, but there's nobody to do it. Well, I'm not going to go find somebody to do that. That's led to some ministry failures on my part where I've said, yeah, this is an important thing. I'm just going to go ahead with it. But having the right
Yeah.
people in the right places are important too.
Yeah. Well, I know that you and I have talked about those kinds of pressures in ministry, and I know that in my prior experience as a faith-based, nonprofit leader, and just realizing, gosh, I really do need these disciplined rhythms of rest and renewal. Not just for me, not just for my family, not just for the ministry, but also to live as a faithful person before the face of God, who created
Yeah.
everything. Right? It's a faith-filled moment, like you said. Um, I'm curious as you kind of talk about that and talk about some expectations from people that things will get done. They want to bring you these wonderful ministry ideas sometimes, and sometimes they're less wonderful, but they're still ideas. And they want either you or someone who looks a whole lot like you to take up the mantle and do it. And the leadership lessons that you learned from having to say no and how to say no. And this one book that I read back in seminary called Leadership on the Line, he calls it failing people at a rate they can stand.
That's right.
Failing
Yep.
people, which is another like, yeah, I'm finite. I can't do everything, and that's just reality. So that's one really important leadership lesson. What other kinds of leadership lessons do you feel like you've been able to tease out over the course of your time? Yes, at World Gospel Church in the last 5 wonderful, but I'm sure also sometimes hard years, but also before that from other mentors and that kind of stuff. And you can give us like a top 3, a top 5, whatever your heart compels you to do.
It's hard to categorize those in the top 5. I'd say a couple of them that stand out right away. One is to trust in and seek the leading of the Holy Spirit. I don't mean that in kind of a super subjective way, but also like if there is a sense inside me where this is not the right time for this, I've just learned over time that I don't go against that because when I look back on it with regret. And maybe that's intuition. Maybe it's God working through my intuition. I don't know, but I trust that. I've come to trust that still small voice inside of me. I don't make everybody else abide by that still small voice, by the way, but it does guide me in where I go. I would say the other thing too is that who you are as a leader is more impactful than any sort of leadership trick or hack that you might have or scheduling hack or whatever it is. I mean, there's definitely benefit in all of those things. But if you're not the person in ministry that you're calling people to be, then you're not able to give them what they need. You can really only produce who you are in ministry in a lot of ways. And I say that carefully because I'm keenly aware every time I preach that I do not embody the passages that I preach well or perfectly, or you name the standard, and how I fail it. And so it is God's powerful word and God's powerful spirit at work. But there is something drastically missing, and the message gets twisted when my heart is not subject to in earnest about obeying and in some way faithful to living. So who you are as a pastor and as a leader is just a huge thing. I'd say, leadership lessons. One of the best things is just that relationships are the key to
Mm,
what you're doing. If you don't have that personal character and then a relationship, you don't have the foundation of trust in your staff. And the point of hiring people, the point of working together as a team in ministry is not to perform ministry functions. So, like the lesson was taught, the sermon was preached, the food was handed out. Instead, the thing that you're producing really is this community that proclaims the truth and lives the truth and embodies it in such a way that it becomes valid in the eyes of the people who hear it. They say, well, I hear those words, but now I see that in you. And so those relationships and the foundation of character and then really connected communication, I think those are the things that build a team. Those are the things that build an ethos that give people the reason to keep coming into ministry, even when it's hard, and to do it for each other, even as you're doing it for the Lord. So those are some of the things that stand out to me.
Yep. Well, I know, at least if I can just add something here too as well. So I am a pastor's kid, and
Okay.
just by God's grace, I still made it out okay. You may have to, I may have to confess a story later, not right now, but part of it is, I was able to watch my dad too as well in terms of how he led
Yeah.
the church, and ultimately, at the end of the day, he was very strong. He still is very strong now, but you could tell the weight on his shoulders as the senior pastor of that church, because even though you could see how the church was thriving. They were planting churches across all of Metro New York and New Jersey. He still had to navigate a lot of these things. And so, Pastor Benjamin, how do you also make sure? Because I know you've been focused on staff, which is amazing. And just hearing the conversation that you've been talking about, trying to make sure you're helping take care of them. How are you making sure you're also preventing your own burnout? Because it's so prevalent now. We've seen so many pastors across all sizes of churches reaching some type of burnout. Now, thankfully, I think it sounds like it's started to reach a little bit of recovery, but it's still there, and it's still kind of the elephant in the room. So, what are some of the things that you do as well, Pastor Benjamin?
Oh yeah, no one is immune to that, and it's a battle. You have to work to get yourself out of burnout,
Yeah.
and that's one of those shocking realities, right? You start to taste it, and you realize now I'm too exhausted to do anything, and so it's a danger. And I've been there. I'm gratefully not there now in my life, but what I talked about it in rest and sabbatical is such a key thing. One of the things that I've come across and I keep coming back to in my spiritual walk and in pastoring is the impact of insecurity in our lives, needing approval from people. And getting to the root of that, I think, undercuts so much of what drives us to burnout. The inability to say no, to disappoint people at the level at which they can tolerate. You want to be Superman. You want to do it all. You got these big goals for the kingdom. And being able to just humanize yourself is really key there. But as far as practices go, some just putting the big rocks in first so that you're not neglecting the things that matter most. That's a big one because the stress of feeling that nag, I'm missing something really big and important that
Yeah.
I should be doing, it really drains the emotional energy and the joy out of you. So focus on those first things first, like the basics of Christianity, my walk with the Lord. If I don't have that walk with the Lord, I have nothing to offer. So prayer, and time in the word where my own soul is nourished with the Lord and my fellowship with him is rich. That's what energizes me for my ministry, but for my family and for everything else. That's the joy of life, period. So being real in those places and finding that grace there, but then also building a culture around you where where that no is okay and where rest is part of the rhythm, I think is really key. It's one of the challenges for every church. Our church is kind of known, from what I understand, historically as the church that works.
Mm.
That's a great thing because church really jumps in, does the labor. But we also need to be on the other side of that coin, the church that rests well too. So yeah, burnout and being there for your family, you realize you don't have anything to give if you get there, and you want to be that person. So you need the renewal. You need the renewal. Planning on a sabbatical coming up. I'm really grateful to our elders and
Wonderful.
deacons that they've approved a sabbatical policy recently, and so I have a plan for 2027 for that, and that includes my family. Hopefully, a chance to build some key memories and connect well and deeply during that time. That whole digital detox and downtime together. I'm really looking
Mhm.
forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saw that one on your reading list, that one of the books was John Mark Comer's The Ruthless Elimination of All Hurry,
Yeah.
which is that wonderful Dallas Willard quote. And that's something that hopefully Ken and I will, on a future podcast, read through that and or listen to it.
I am reading it right now. It is on my audiobook as I listen to it, but it's okay. I'm still retaining some of the info.
That's
So,
good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I was curious, Ben, as you were talking and thinking through this burnout question. It is encouraging to see more and more institutions, none less than the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, ECFA, that has really jumped in this with both feet and said, "Hey, this is now one of our standards is
Hmm.
leader care and making sure that churches, faith-based nonprofits, ECFA institutions that are accredited, they got that good housekeeping stamp of approval, that
Mhm.
they're actually taking care of their leaders." And I remember I was talking to a ECFA big wig, and I said, "Hey, our church just passed a sabbatical policy." And you know what? He looked at me in my eyeballs and he said, "Well, that's a nice start. That's a nice start. Like, that's cute." And I was like, "Yeah, but come on, man. We're doing
It's the
the
first steps.
it's the first step." And I kid, and I knew that. But it is meant to be kind of an initial foray into thinking more and more about, yes, we have this identity as a church that gets stuff done. We do stuff. We're workers. But at the same time, like, we understand our limitations and we understand that we need to make sure that we're taking care of our people. And so that's the desire there for sure. As we think about kind of the medium-sized churches and the things that are particular to senior pastors and the burdens you carry and um, the things that are maybe somewhat unique to a medium-sized church, I want to think through the ministries of World Gospel Church and the systems that we have in place at World Gospel Church, or systems that you're thinking about putting in place at World Gospel Church. Um, so tell us a little bit more about things that you've seen work well in a medium-sized church to help keep people kind of rowing in the same direction as a ministry, and things that push against rowing in the same direction as a church, because both those forces are constantly at work, night and day, as Jesus said in the parable of the seed growing secretly. Night and day, they're both
Yeah.
growing. So
you know,
tell us more about that.
There you go. Yeah. That's a great question. So, in a church our size, in some of our contexts too, World Gospel Church was founded in 1954. And so we have a long legacy behind us and the memory of some long serving pastors through that time that extends even to today in some of the membership's memory. That's a factor as far as the inertia and the direction of the church is goes as well. So, in some ways, we're walking out what previous pastors envisioned for us and built into the people, and then also adapting to the new people that God's brought to our church during that time and the vision that we're able to develop together under my leadership and the elders' leadership here in this season of our ministry. And so I would say, some of it, as a pastor, you don't start with a blank slate and there is
That's right.
you have this imaginary church which is not your church. You have the church that you are serving at and the next steps of faith that that church needs to take. And so so particularly to the medium-sized church, I would say that we have to be a little bit more general in our ministry programming in order to catch the widest swaths of people that we can. So we do focus on sort of the big buckets and we focus on intergenerational ministry because we can still do that in a lot of contexts here. We have a Wednesday night gathering that is intentionally intergenerational, round tables together with middle school through adult. And I think that's just a beautiful pathway for people into relationship, which is what we're trying to build. And then as far as other things unique, we have a youth ministry. We're sort of big enough for that, and maybe a little bit more of a significant worship ministry than we might be able to pull off if we were slightly smaller, not quite to the level of a large church. And so those are some of the big buckets that we operate in to try to capture everybody. Of course, a strong children's ministry is key in any church,
Hmm.
and we are
Hmm.
grateful to have strong ministry leadership there,
Right.
as well as it's actually one of the uniting parts of our church. It's kind of interesting. So, on a given Sunday, we'll have dozens of people working in the kids ministry, and our most recent children's ministry gathering, I think, had about 80 to 100 volunteers who showed up for that. So, in a church of 350, we've got a significant portion of people who are finding both community and opportunities to serve in the children's ministry. So we do find that that's a big place where people connect. And as much as systems and programming are important, you can't put too much in the sort of organic category, but it has to be in systems where people can find those personal relationships. And
Mm.
we're finding that just even in service, that's a main way that that happens. Of course, there's education, and we have teachers there that are serving, and our eyes are always on, pulling up those leaders as well. Um, but to have lots of distinct ministry teams is not quite where we're at the size church that we're at. Our ministry teams will be small and kind of lightweight, but also nimble in service.
Good.
I think the word agile is very important too here because
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, especially if you see the big church itself, the mega churches and all, you start to feel it probably as a pastor sometimes feel like, oh my goodness, they all have so many folks and different folks for each of these areas. Where the
Right.
reality is majority of churches are in that small to medium size where there are essentially the reliance on folks being willing to take on multiple hats, being willing to work as a cohesive team. And I think that's where the biggest encouragement is here is just saying there's different ways that, God's still going to utilize different sized churches for his kingdom. But this in itself is emphasizing that even a medium sized church, there is still a substantial kingdom impact, especially when the heart and the intentions are there too as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you realize that wherever you're planted, some people spend a lot of their lives pining for a different position, and if you just apply yourself to love the people that are right there in your office, if you're a full-time ministry staff, and then on Sundays and Wednesdays or whatever you meet, then you're gonna find that you can have an eternal impact anywhere you go and everywhere you go where there are people. And so, boy, that's a beautiful thing to me. It takes away a lot of you know, a lot of what could be jealousy over the resources that a larger church might have. Because everywhere I am, I can do ministry and the people here can do effective ministry. So praise God for that. And I'm grateful for the ministry that other larger churches have. We use sometimes other churches' facilities for things. But boy, just bloom where you're planted. What a beautiful thing to do.
That's good. That's good. Well, kind of thinking along the lines of some practical takeaways and that sort of thing as you've worked in some larger churches and you've worked at World Gospel Church, obviously a medium-sized church. What are some things you've learned about developing volunteers, developing leaders, spotting leaders, and kind of getting people on a pathway, a trajectory? I know that one of the things that you really pressed into as part of your leadership development is, I mean, this is kind of a dumb moment, but you'll appreciate it. Discipleship, This- and how important that is, and how it's not a concept to be sort of shelved for the super Christians or the ones who are really dedicated to Jesus and Navy SEALs for Jesus, but rather this is part and parcel of what every single person in the Church of Jesus Christ who claims to be a believer should be a part of and doing. So, if you could tell us a little bit more about what you've learned about leadership development, discipleship, and how you see that sort of worked out at World Gospel Church in ways you want to see it worked out in more depth, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, really, every leader is built one by one in a relationship with somebody else. You have to pass on the ethos, the heart, the character, and the skills can be taught. That's the easy part. But that spiritual depth, you're talking about, Chris, that discipleship. So starting there, and that's really where you see people's giftings come out, are in those small groups of maybe 2 to 5 men or 2 to 5 women, sometimes even in one-on-ones. And I found particular effectiveness in discipling there and in real strong life transformation, especially in tough spots of life. Kind of almost half counseling, half discipleship
Mm.
in a typical sense. But you see in those spaces people's personalities and their character coming out, their propensities, their capacities. And then from there, you're drawing them into leadership and identifying them, giving them opportunities to come alongside somebody who's gifted the way they are. For instance, in classrooms, we've got Sunday school teachers who have identified men that could be teachers, and they're calling them to come teach when they've never taught anything in their lives before. But they're doing it alongside with them, side with them, that kind of apprenticing, mentoring. And that is the way that the vine, if you use that trellis and vine image, grows. It's in those strong connections. And so, yeah, the discipleship and the leadership development are hand in glove, because it is a relational product that's being made. So that is all the way down the line. Every area of ministry, we're encouraging people and trying to develop the vision for. You're not just here to lead this ministry, but you're here to lead the next generation of leaders in this ministry, or to multiply this ministry out so that it reaches and touches more people. So what we do in discipling relationships is call people to realize from the beginning, this is not just come grow in your personal walk with the Lord. This is come grow in your calling to make disciples and see the kingdom of God spread. So if you don't have that call as part of your initial invitation to serve or to be discipled, you find that it's hard to get there later on down the road to say, oh, actually, no, this is really about you doing the same thing with somebody else. It's almost like you need a reconversion at that point, or a complete reset with somebody. So building in that call at the beginning is really key.
Awesome. Now, when it comes to even just knowing that you've had so much experience, Pastor Benjamin, and you've seen it over the years, just, how not the church itself has evolved, but just the environment itself. What kind of advice would you give younger pastors that are about to leave or finish, seminary? Some of the things that you feel like they need to be prepared for, or just some type of advice or encouragement, just because I know they're probably jumping in to an environment that probably has some differences from what you've seen, but it also gives at least a different perspective of not being afraid, but being prepared. So what are some of the things that you feel like you could be some advice that you could share?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things, from my own experience, is to accept and not be in a rush. Accept your role of ministry initially, and don't be in a rush to change that. Be someplace long enough to where you can have a cycle of fruitfulness that you can go all the way through from beginning to end, whether that's in your youth ministry or if you're in another kind of role. Don't rush ahead, because especially if you have got a godly mentor, somebody who's well adjusted in ministry and can invest in you. You're not going to have a perfect pastor. I'm not perfect. You're never going to have a perfect senior pastor, but somebody who's solid, who will invest in you. Stay there, learn, and let it take its course to the point where people say you need to be in a different role, or a developmental role, the next step, and whether that's senior pastor or not, however God's gifted you. And that patience will give you the chance to learn the lessons that you need and put the emphasis on the right syllable, in that leadership. I'd also say, hearkening back to what I mentioned earlier about insecurity, I would say really focus there first. You're going to save yourself so much angst in leadership if you can get to the place where you're secure in Christ. You're okay saying no, and that takes some clarity on what ministry is and what priorities are there in ministry versus things that are nice to have or wish we have. That kind of clarity is really going to help you, because you're going to need it when you go into that conflict situation, and you're going to have to say some truth that's going to be difficult to hear. You're going to need it when sweet Susie gives you that great idea that you're just going to have to say you don't have the bandwidth for that right now.
Not a real person, by the way. In
Yeah,
case
that's
she's
right.
listening.
Yeah, Susie, sorry about that. No, there's no Susie. I was trying to pick a name that wouldn't offend anybody right off the bat. But anyway, yeah. So so I would say those are a couple of big ones. And then also pastoral relationships. You want to have real relationships in your church. Some people say don't do that. They're wrong. You are a member of your church, as a pastor, and so am I. I need the brothers and sisters in my church to invest in me, to hold me accountable, to encourage me, to pray for me, just like I want to be doing for them. So be a church member, first and foremost, and then be the pastor in that context. But develop relationships with pastors who are in a similar enough situation to you that you can identify with one another. I have relationships with people who are in mega churches, and there's some crossover there, but we're in a little bit of a different world. So finding somebody in a medium-sized church like mine has been life-saving for me. Somebody I can go to and talk about the challenges of ministry and not just have those repercussions and weirdness that happens if you were to have those conversations within the church. I'm not running my church down. I love my church, but there's just a mutual understanding that only a pastor has in the senior role about what's going on in ministry and the dynamics that are involved there. So strong relationships, mentoring, personal security. Yeah,
Love it.
those are keys. Patience.
That's good. That's good. Pastor Ben, one of the things I've really appreciated about you and your leadership is just how, like you just said, how relational it is. Um, it's not it's not programmatic, but you have an appreciation for programs and understand their importance. It's not rote. It's ad hoc in the best sense of the term, right? It's to this particular person. It's not rushed. Whenever we get together, I never feel like you're like, all right, I got to get this guy in line. I got to make sure that he's, getting the stuff done that we're supposed to be getting done. There's an element of that for sure, because things do have to get done, but it's much more focused on who are we becoming, what kind of inner man are we nurturing, like it talks about in the scriptures, and how are we growing. So I really appreciate that about you. So turning a little bit to the church in general,
Mhm.
what gives you hope about the church? What's kind of lighting your fire when it comes to the church these days? And this can be about World Gospel Church. This can be the Big C Church. But tell me more about your heart for the church and your hope for it.
Yeah, just I've been encouraged recently by thinking about the growth of the church despite being in hard places.
Mm,
Uh, that's just a glorious thing that behind an iron curtain, behind the Great Wall of China, whatever images you want to use, in Iran, wherever it is around the world, God's church is growing and can't be defeated.
yeah.
I remember hearing someone say, if for the first 10 years it'll last, because there'll be enough oxygen. But once they suck the oxygen out of the room, the church is just going to fold and it's going to go dark. And then the Iron Curtain fell. And then in China, we have visibility through the internet. In Iran and other places, you realize, no, that's not what happened at all. So the confidence that God's going to accomplish his purposes, boy, that gives me confidence serving here in my local church in Terre Haute, Indiana, that the gospel doesn't get defeated. Jesus wins. And so we're on the winning team. I'm really encouraged by that. I'm also encouraged to see culturally some of the sort of axioms of secular culture falling in people's
Mm,
minds. They have assumed that there is no God and that there is no purpose in life. And then now tasting that fruit without some of the sort of Christian underpinnings of our culture has led a lot of people to realize, wait a second, there is something real that I need that's lost in not believing in God, not believing in a transcendent power. So I'm hopeful for the church in that sense, just in our immediate cultural context. And that's going to lead to some awakenings for people. And we see that playing out some. It's hard to get my head around the numbers there. And I hear conflicting reporting about conversions and all that. But I can see it. I can see it from 15 years ago. It's a different climate, and I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
that's good.
Well, I guess, just as I think through again, super, I've been encouraged and excited about just like some of the things we've talked about. I kind of want to do a little bit of a rapid fire, if that's okay, Chris. And this is where part of it is because, like Pastor Benjamin, I see the background there of a very well led, a well read leader too. And so, when it comes to just some books that every pastor should consider reading, or even if it's just a church leader, what are some of the things that you think should be some great suggestions for them to start out at?
Yeah. I love Paul David Tripp's Dangerous Calling. I think that's a great look at what it means to be somebody who's visibly called and processing through some of the dangers there because they're real. We see a lot of church leaders falling. I think starting there is a great spot for somebody in ministry.
Awesome. Chris, your turn.
All right. The most underrated ministry in the church. This is an interesting one.
Oh, the most underrated ministry in the prayer.
Mm.
Prayer. Yeah, that seems to be the thing we do in order to transition our mediums, It's the bread and butter of what we do.
It's amazing how a lot of times we just tend to think of it as only as a time just to ask for things, but not also just to have a conversation. And
Yeah.
there's been some of the times, even my approaches have been that, there have been times where I used to have commutes and all of my previous roles that time, that quiet time allowed me just to have a conversation with God on what was on my mind. And that in itself was powerful in and of itself because it allows you just to, how I've at least seen it is you let go of some of the things that are actually not in your control and saying, God, I'm leaving it up to you as a part of this. Not saying I'm asking it, but just saying, leave it up to you. So it gives you that peace.
Yeah, it just reorients you, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. I guess if I think about the next one is, what is the biggest myth about pastors?
Oh, yeah, that they're like somehow different than other people. Yeah. They have this, they're super people or something, and they don't like kind of back to the church member thing. Like, I don't need encouragement or a friend or anything like that. I just, everything's easy and it happens because you're called, and that they only work 1 hour a week. There's that too.
That's not easy. It's a factual statement.
And I'm just going to add, and their kids have to be absolute angels. Let me just, okay.
Yes.
That's right. Is this confession time? Because I think this will be the first time we'll ever come out here in terms of just the conversation we're about to share. So, as a pastor's kid, I wasn't that bad, but I guess I had a misunderstanding when I was much younger because actually, as kids, we weren't at the main worship service, but we had our own like little kids Sunday school during that period. And I noticed probably once a month, after the services finished, there was just a bunch of plates that had all these melt in your mouth discs and all this grape juice. And there would be a time where over time, we're like, we don't want to waste this. So my friends and I would go as soon as it finished and eat all the discs and all the grape juice. Cause I mean, it was Welch's. They were not skimping on the grape juice during communion, which I found out. Turns out that I was supposed to that stuff actually gets packaged up again for later. And for a period of time, they were wondering what was going on, why they would never have enough communion wafers and grape juice because the pastor's kids happened to have had his second snack in the afternoon. So that was my confession. Could have been worse, right? But that's just not the worst thing. Could have been worse. But that was a misunderstanding, right? But even this thing.
If you guys had celebrated with wine, that would have been more interesting. I bet
It would have been even more interesting conversation, right?
This lush, like toddling down the hallway, like all.
That's right.
Yeah.
Not a Southern Baptist church. I got it.
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah. Exactly.
We'll get diabetes, but we're not gonna drink that alcohol.
That's right.
All right. The last rapid fire question.
Got it right.
Most important habit for ministry leaders. The most important habit for ministry leaders.
I would say so. The dull ones, right? Your devotion time, right, and walking with the Lord. But I would say transparency. Transparency, because that undercuts that pride or that desire to fit the role of being the perfect one. So be transparent, and then you can just be a real person. That takes a lot of pressure off.
Can I do a 30-second double click on that? Because that is it's both a powerful statement and a real statement, and I 100% agree with it. But I'm also thinking to myself, if I'm a pastor and my employment is oftentimes dependent upon certain elements not being revealed, and there's all kinds of stuff with that, right? Not like incentives to not being transparent. How do you walk out transparency as a pastor? What does it look like? Does it look like the group of fellow pastors who are also serving in other locations? Yeah. Does it look like transparency to a point with parishioners? Give us some context.
Yeah, that's helpful, Chris, because it does your transparency travels along your levels of trust and accountability as well. And so I think it is appropriate with your people who you're spiritually connected with and peers and mentors to be completely open. For instance, like that pastor group that I'm talking about. That's a place you can do that safely. But it's also you don't have to. You can be just as transparent without being as specific, if you know what I mean. You
Oh
can
yeah.
say you can talk about the categories of things that you struggle with, or about how God has changed your heart in bigger terms with groups of people where you don't have that level of trust or that level of accountability. So you don't want to turn the pulpit into the confessional and start getting into the nitty gritty of each one of the details of your sin. That's just confusing and it lacks the context of a relationship where that makes sense and all of that. So that's a good point. You do want to moderate what you actually talk about, but the fact that you're a sinner and that you need Jesus should be stated to everybody regularly.
Yeah. That's really good. That's really good.
Yeah.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, and it has been a tremendous blessing, Pastor Ben, to hang out with you. It feels like one of our regular conversations that we have. Hopefully, it feels as wonderful and fun and natural as those usually are, where they range far and wide. Um, I appreciate you and your leadership, and as always, man, know that we're praying for you, and know that your ministry matters an incredible amount. I think that myth about pastors being like they're people who need encouragement and who need some people to just come alongside of them and put their hand on their shoulder and say, "Hey, man, I see you. I see
Yeah.
you."
Yeah, that's right. Hey, thank you guys for having me. I mean, just the fact that you invited me on here to have a conversation like this shows that you care, and that's just a real encouragement to me. And that you're trying to support and bless the church. Wow, what an awesome thing! What an awesome thing to do. So, thanks for the ministry that you're performing to us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pastor Benjamin, for joining as well. It's been an honor to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, likewise. All right, take care, guys. Thanks a lot.
This is not a CPA firm. Assurance, attest, and audit services provided by Cape and Krause, LLC. Carr, Riggs & Ingram, and CRI are the brand names under which Carr, Riggs & Ingram, LLC, CRI Advisors, LLC, and Cape and Krause, LLC, and CRI Cape and Krause Advisors, LLC provide professional services. CRI CPA, Cape and Krause CPA, CRI Advisors, Cape and Krause Advisors, Carr, Riggs & Ingram Capital, LLC, and their respective subsidiaries operate as an alternative practice structure in accordance with the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct and applicable law, regulations, and professional standards. CRI CPA and Cape and Krause CPA are licensed independent certified public accounting firms that separately provide attest services, as well as additional ancillary services to their clients. CRI CPA and Cape and Krause CPA are independently owned CPA firms that provide attestation services separate from one another. CRI Advisors and Cape and Krause Advisors provide tax and business consulting services to its clients. CRI Advisors and its subsidiaries, including Cape and Krause Advisors, are not licensed CPA firms and will not provide any attest services. The entities falling under the Carr, Riggs & Ingram, or CRI brand are independently owned and are not responsible or liable for the services and/or products provided, or engaged to be provided by any other entity under the Carr, Riggs & Ingram, or CRI brand. Our use of the term CRI, we, our, us, and terms of similar import denote the alternative practice structure conducted by CRI CPA, Cape and Krause CPA, Cape and Krause Advisors, and CRI Advisors as appropriate.